Good evening. My name is Meghla Krishnamurthy, and I'm a member of the faculty at Ashoka University, where I teach sociology and anthropology. On behalf of Ashoka University, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the seventh session of Beyond the Classroom, our special series of live and interactive virtual seminars. One of the great joys and privileges of being at Ashoka is the chance to learn every day from remarkable colleagues, from their research, teaching, and experience across a range of disciplines. So during these very difficult times for India and for the world, we thought we would ask members of the Ashoka faculty to share with us twice a week, every Saturday and Wednesday, the questions and ideas that have engaged and excited them long before this pandemic descended upon us and that continue to do so. We hope that this is the kind of intellectual restlessness that will offer us some relief, insight, and inspiration as we strive to make sense of a world in crisis and begin to imagine it anew. It is also a way for us to share with you the great joy, vigor, and quest for excellence that drives us all at Ashoka. I'm now delighted to introduce you to our speaker for this evening, Amita Baviskar, Professor of Environmental Studies and Anthropology and Sociology at Ashoka University. After studying economics and sociology at the University of Delhi, Amita received a Ph.D. in development sociology from Cornell University. During her career, she has taught at the University of Delhi and has been a visiting scholar at several universities, including Stanford, Yale, Sciences Po, and UC Berkeley. Her first book, In the Belly of the River, Tribal Conflicts Over Development in the Narmada Valley, and other writings explore themes of resource rights, popular resistance, and discourses of environmentalism. And in January 2020, she published her latest book, Uncivil City, Ecology, Equity, and the Commons in Delhi. Hi, Amita. It's so great to see you. I think you're on mute.
Wonderful to see you, Meghla. How are you?
Great to see you. It's so nice to be connected, even in these very strange and socially distant times. I was just thinking, looking at the title of your talk, that this moment of lockdown has really focused so much attention on what is essential, on the essential economy. And I think food and food systems have really come front and center. And so many of these connections between industrial food and our food habits and food systems and provisioning mechanisms have suddenly come to light in a way that they haven't before. So it's such a timely and important talk. And I know that lots of people are really excited to hear you.
Thanks so much, Meghla. I think food is on everybody's minds, partly because food is so important in terms of feeling secure, the emotional comfort of eating things you're familiar with. But what's happened with the pandemic also tells us about the great gulf in what people get to eat and those who are dependent on others for even that, one little thali of puri bhaji that they have to stand in a queue for hours to get. So, let me then actually begin with telling you a
Before
bit.
you begin, I'm so sorry. I know that everybody is really looking forward to this, but before you begin, I'm just going to give a couple of housekeeping announcements and then make myself scarce. Amita will speak for about 20 minutes, and after that, you can ask your questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. You can send in your name or you can ask your questions anonymously. All of these sessions are being recorded and will be uploaded on our website. We will soon share with you a link for the entire series. So thank you once again for joining us on Beyond the Classroom, and I will turn the screen over to Amita Baviskar.
Thank you so much, Meghla. Let me start by telling you how I came to study food, because I've spent most of my working life looking at land and forests and rivers, or at city slums and city streets, exploring how poor people, mainly Adivasis and Dalits, laboring under almost impossible odds, fight for their right to live decently and with dignity. And my journey began many years ago on the banks of the river Narmada in Madhya Pradesh, where Adivasis were fighting against displacement by a large dam. And for a year, I lived in a remote Adivasi hill village. I did the sort of classic anthropological thing. I learned their language, Bilali. I participated in their everyday life, from rituals to festivals to farming, as well as to grinding flour by hand, which is, believe me, very hard to do. Um, and this experience of living in a village of Bhilala Adivasis actually marked me for life. And my utmost respect for people who dominant society considers backward and worthless comes from learning at close quarters that just exactly how much they know, how hard they work, how rich are their relations with their environment. And this respect and this quest to learn what the world looks like from the point of view of the poorest, most exploited sections of our society, to appreciate their priorities and their perspectives, is what gives direction to my work. And so I've been visiting my friends in the Narmada Valley now for almost 30 years. And in that time, I've seen a sea change in what people eat. So in the 1990s, when I first went to Alirajpur, everybody ate zwar ki roti all the year. And this is jwar, sorghum. And Adivasis would laugh at wheat. They would say, gehu se to pet nahi bharta. And they'd say it's jwar that makes your blood red. That's what gives you the strength to work in the fields. So you can imagine my bemusement when, on more recent visits, I began to hear that younger people didn't like eating jowar at all. Um, so much so that people had even stopped growing it. And wheat from the ration shop, wheat flour that they bought when they went as migrant laborers to Gujarat, the growing belief that wheat was what respectable people ate, had made these Adivasis give up a nutritious grain that they could grow themselves and that they offered to their gods and ancestors. So these encounters gradually convinced me that one of the most profound changes that we have seen in our lifetime is about what we eat and how we produce it. And this change is not only about economy, but it's actually about our identities, who we are, and about our aspirations, who we want to be. So, trying to make sense of these changes led me to study processed foods. And today I'm just going to present a very small slice of a much larger research project. So, it was about 10 years ago, as I was walking through the Delhi University campus, that I noticed that the usual street side vendors who sold bhel puri and banta masala now had new competition. On the low wall of the arts faculty compound stood a hissing portable stove on which simmered a saucepan. And a young man added shredded cabbage and carrots into it. And soon he was ladling out a mush of noodles and vegetables onto paper plates for students lounging around on the lawns nearby. At 10 rupees a plate, there was a steady stream of customers who stopped by for this hot and tasty treat. And Maggi noodles had therefore hit the streets, and they have never looked back since. So today, um, college canteens and student cafes still have samosa and dosa, but the popularity of these old favorites has now been eclipsed by Maggi instant noodles. There are restaurants that are dedicated to Maggi themes. They serve Maggi dosa, Maggi milkshakes, even Maggi sandwiches. And college students in cities as far apart as Guwahati, Chidambaram, and Allahabad told me that Maggi was their favorite food. And some even declared that they ate it every single day. So in other places, Maggi is popular too. In the Siachen Glacier, along the Indo-Pak border, which is the world's highest and coldest battlefield, soldiers swear by a celebrated dish called the Siachen omelette. And it's made out of powdered eggs stuffed with cooked Maggi noodles. And these are two of the few foodstuffs that can survive at that Arctic altitude. In a survey of midday meals served in government schools in Delhi, children said they didn't want to eat rajma chawal or chole chawal, the nutritious foods that they were usually served. They wanted noodles. And elsewhere in India, on the scenic lookout on the road to the Himalayan hill resort of Mussoorie, known for decades as Sunset Point, now it has been renamed Maggie Point because that is now one goes there to look at the sunset while eating Maggie. So, over the last 20 years, unbranded noodles have become popular across the social spectrum in rural and urban India. So, rickshaw pullers in a busy retail market in Delhi crowd around a chow mein cart, twirling strands of noodles around plastic forks, implements that they'd never come across before. Migrant workers at construction sites in Bihar and Odisha do the same. However, in urban bastis and small rural towns, the demand for these generic dishes is outstripped by Maggi, the instant noodles manufactured by Nestle. So, for people like me who were born in the 1960s and grew up in the 1970s when Maggi was unknown, this is quite puzzling. Why is Maggi so phenomenally popular? How did it zoom ahead to become India's number one food brand? And how did it become so ubiquitous that advertising experts call it the third staple after wheat and rice? So, when I asked my friends and colleagues, upper middle class, middle aged parents, they said, what's there to explain? Junk food is addictive. It's refined flour, fat, and sugar and MSG, and it's poisoning our kids. And some mothers said that their children just refuse to eat the standard North Indian, dal, sabzi, roti, dahi, lunch, and dinner served at home. And they insisted that they would only eat Maggi. Now, parents are right to frown upon noodles because we know that junk foods have led to the explosive growth of obesity, of type 2 diabetes, and heart disease among adolescents and children in India. And this epidemic of food related excess seems even more grotesque in a country where millions live with hunger and malnutrition. And the levels of deprivation in India rival those in sub Saharan Africa. So there is this tremendous inequality. One set of people suffering from obesity because of too much food and the wrong kind of food, and one set who don't have food at all. So some scholars point out that the problem with Maggi is not only the product, but its producer. They point out that these convenient, inexpensive, and easy to like foods are part of a global project pursued by Nestle and other giant corporations to transform the poor into consumers. And these proletarian hunger killers, which is what they call them, are how MNCs profit from low income yet aspiring markets. By making small units of consumer goods available at low prices to billions of poor people, these firms rake in the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid. And in 2002, Nestle decided to sell its instant noodles in 5 rupee packets of 35 grams and aggressively expand their availability in small towns. And then they laughed all the way to the bank while leaving behind a trail of malnutrition and a mountain of non biodegradable packaging waste. So you see, Maggi noodles, Coke and Pepsi, Britannia bread, and Parle glucose biscuits are what are called classic industrial foods, mass manufactured commodities produced using capital intensive technologies and distributed by corporate firms. And pushed by the market muscle of MNCs and seductive advertising, these commodities teach people to desire the same useless things and help capitalism create and extend its market reach by squeezing out small firms and by destroying the diversity of local diets. So, this analysis makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't explain everything. And the problem is that it assumes that industrial foods have always successfully steamrollered their way through history that global capital only smothers local systems of meaning and value. But is that always true? Take India, for example. We have historically had a love hate relationship with foreign products. In fact, um, our very identity as a nation was built on rejecting foreign goods and companies. So during the freedom struggle, patriotic Indians boycotted British made goods, especially mill made cloth. Wearing khadi, hand spun, hand woven cloth, was a symbol of support for local weavers who were being marginalized by colonial policies. And just as khadi became a way of being proudly, authentically Indian, there were a host of other consumer choices that regarded foreign things as alien, as exploitative, as dangerous. Even today, many people are suspicious about foreign goods. Now, after we became independent, the idea of indigenous production and consumption became even more important in a new nation strapped for funds. The priority was on production, using local resources to make the nation self sufficient. Consumption was a luxury and it was frowned upon. So, true patriots were those who saved their money, lived simply, and worked hard to build the nation. It was only in the 1990s, after economic liberalization opened up Indian markets to foreign made products, that the citizen came to be defined in the public discourse by the right to consume. So the wholesale adoption of foreign goods in India is a recent phenomenon, and it remains a contested one. So, how did Nestle overcome the potential stigma attached to its foreign origins? Well, it decided to go native. So Maggie's ad campaigns don't have a global reference or a cosmopolitan cultural allure. Maggie's glamour is anchored in Indian icons and values, led by superstars Amitabh Bachchan and Madhuri Dixit. Its ads draw upon the familiar Indian trope of unity in diversity. So, citizenship is about shared national belonging constituted through identical consumer practices, be it a fisherman in the sea of Western India, be it monks, Tibetan Buddhist monks in North Indian Himalayas, they're all eating this national dish. The ads also use Indian languages where children bound into the house saying, Mummy, Mummy, bhook lagi hai, to which the mother replies, Bas, 2 minute, as she turns to the stove, placing a saucepan of water to boil. Bas 2 minute, just 2 minutes, is Maggie's main slogan. It marries the promise of instant gratification to a mother's desire to instantly satisfy her children's hunger, which is an enduring cultural value across India. Rather audaciously, Nestle also shows its noodles as a way of transmitting family tradition, a bond between mother and daughter. So one ad shows a girl making Maggie while her mother is standing there watching, bristling with disapproval. But the mother's misgivings are soon replaced by a gratified smile when she sees that her daughter has cooked Maggie exactly the way she does. So, with this emphasis on the sociality around food, the bonding of family and friends, Nestle has taken an unfamiliar food and domesticated it completely. And yet, Maggie's claim to represent the nation is always a struggle. A major identity crisis for Maggie occurred in 2015 when the government found that there were excessive lead in its products and banned Maggie nationwide. It was only 5 months later that Maggie was relaunched, but it had lost a good deal of ground. And it was then that the yoga guru Baba Ramdev, who has his own consumer goods empire under the Patanjali Ayurveda brand, he launched his natural noodles. And Patanjali claims that the noodles are not only healthier, but they're cheaper and they're also Swadeshi. So, on the rather ironic battleground of instant noodles, Maggie's claim to national belonging now contends with Patanjali's claim of being more authentically Indian. This advertisement is a spoof, please remember. This shows that, in fact, the career of a multinational food product is also sometimes marked with risks and reversals. Now, I want to turn to the cultural meaning of processed foods in a nation defined by sharp economic and social disparities. We know that food and marriage are the two spheres of life where caste still dominates. Stigma and discrimination based on ideas of purity and pollution surround how most Indians eat, cook, and share their food. Many upper caste Hindus will not accept food from those below them in the caste hierarchy. Until recently, even in the public sphere, caste discrimination was displayed in the notorious two glass system, where village chai shops would maintain separate glasses for their Dalit customers. In many parts of the country, Dalit cleaners are still given stale food and leftover scraps as a part of their wages. So, among the ways of keeping Dalits apart and below is to look down on what they eat. Many Dalits eat beef and pork because these are cheap meats and they're tabooed to twice born Hindus and Muslims, respectively. But because of the social stigma attached, they prefer not to talk about what they eat. So many of my informants from the Dhobi and Khatik castes in a basti in North Delhi said that they only ate chicken and fish because these were meats acceptable to most upper class communities, caste communities, except for, of course, vegetarian Brahmins and Banyas. Many young women and girls said that they didn't eat meat at all. So, although in some parts of the country, Dalits have challenged casteism by inverting the symbols of stigma, organizing beef festivals in universities, and documenting Dalit foodways, Dalits living in mixed neighborhoods prefer to be discreet about what they eat in order to fit into dominant society. And the road to respectability and upward mobility has meant leaving behind customary cuisines with their painful memories of ostracization and poverty. So the cultural politics of food has become even more vicious since the rise of Hindu nationalism. So, in an environment where what you eat can be used to condemn you and even kill you, industrial foods appear neutral, unmarked by caste, religion, or class. And this, combined with advertising that claims Maggie is the nation's favorite food, makes them symbols of consumer citizenship, the aspiration to eat on equal terms with others, more privileged people. Those who eat instant noodles are now also working class people in rural and urban India who can, in a modest way, enjoy some of the same pleasures as the classes above them. For those whose customary food is looked upon as provincial and crude, even disgusting, foods like Maggie are a way to be modern. And their packaging, their advertising promise not only fun and hygiene and instant gratification, but transport the consumer into a world of good looking and well dressed families enjoying meals in beautiful homes. Remember that economic liberalization has made it harder for workers to organize collectively and demand their rights as producers. So, consumption is increasingly the sphere where people claim citizenship and social belonging across the public sphere and in their place within the nation. Avoiding foods associated with oppression, eating foods which are free of the older identities that stigmatize them. These foods become forms of cultural expression, political expression for many Indians. Keep in mind that those who eat industrial food still suffer from serious deprivation. 20% of rural households don't have electricity in their homes. 63 million villagers in India don't have access to clean drinking water. But even as they struggle to get secure hold of basic food, more biscuits, more corn chips, more colas, and more noodles. So for the Dalit laborer's daughter who buys a 5 rupee pack of Maggi, the noodles offer a little bit of a break from always being at the bottom. However fleeting or fragile this feeling, it's important to understand that in societies divided by caste and class, industrial foods can be a way of escaping oppressive tradition. Finally, I come to the case of Maggie and the generation gap. Those analysts who look only at industrial foods as a capitalist tool that takes over third world cultures is another important aspect. And that's the rise of youth power and the role of industrial foods in it. Most Maggie consumers in India are children, adolescents, and young adults. And MNCs know this and they work to capture this segment. However, almost all my informants mentioned that they cook with Maggie. They add their own ingredients to what's in the package. A student from Nagaland adds smoked pork that he's brought from home. Students in hostels add cheese powder and beaten egg into the broth. And a teenager told me that at her boarding school, the whole dormitory would eat midnight Maggie cooked in large buckets in water boiled by using an immersion rod. So, in these young people's minds, these stories signify their ability to personalize Maggie using their ingenuity and their skill, the very essence of cooking. Yet, most of them can't cook the basic dishes of an Indian meal. Many of them shrugged and looked sheepish when I asked if they could make dal or sabzi or rice. And of course, this is quite typical for young men who are traditionally not supposed to cook. But it's now also true for many middle class young women whose parents want them to focus on studying and professional careers. So, young men and women living away from home sometimes employed cooks, but they also made Maggie meals for themselves. And as one of them said, it's not like eating chips where you just open the packet and eat. You can do things to Maggie. So, this is the paradox that the success of an instant food is partly based on the fact that it encourages its consumers to cook. And this is another dimension of consumer citizenship, the satisfaction of exercising one's agency and independence. For young people, making Maggie represents their autonomy, that they can prepare a hot meal for themselves. And while other cooking is regarded as difficult and boring and hard to learn, Maggie's easy add ons seem fun to do. And fun, a word that often came up in people's description of Maggie, is another aspect of consumption that we often forget about. Even as their parents condemned Maggie as junk food, most of the young people I talked to shrugged off these concerns with some version of, yeah, but Maggie is fun. And when asked why, several just giggled, but one person said, junk food, hai na? And isliye. So what she meant was it's fun because it's junk food, suggesting that pleasure lay in breaking rules, in transgression, knowingly eating something that's bad for you, but to enjoy only, no, without overthinking it. So for this generation, Maggie is a beloved comfort food, a taste that they share with a youthful community of millions, a cultural good that consolidates and affirms their identity as young Indians. And so, to sum up, what do Maggie noodles tell us about taste and desire in a consumer economy in a deeply unequal society? At first glance, the fast rising consumption of industrial foods seems to be the familiar stories of multinational corporations pushing junk foods. However, there's a lot more going on, be it nationalist politics, be it the popularity of processed foods as a form of consumer citizenship, as poor and low caste people who are discriminated against aspire to eat commodities that allow them to belong in a modern, affluent world. And for young people, instant noodles speak of their desire for autonomy and fun. That's it. So thank you, Ashoka, for organizing this series and inviting me to talk. And thank you, the audience, for being there and for listening. And now I turn over to our moderator, Utkarsh Amitabh. Utkarsh is the founder of Network Capital. He did an MBA from INSEAD, and he's been a Chevening Fellow at Oxford. And I'm happy to say that he was also my student when he was a Young India Fellow at Ashoka. Welcome, Utkarsh.
It's wonderful to be here. I was actually taking copious notes as you were speaking. I felt like I went straight back to the classroom. I really enjoyed the way you presented, the facts about Maggie, the ethnographic lens towards five broad areas: marketing, consumer behavior, globalization at large, desire, what we want and why, and essentially, most importantly, externalities, things that happen but we don't often estimate in our analysis. So there are quite a few questions that have come up. I'm going to try and combine a few and present them, and we can try and take as many as possible. And if there's room, I'll try to squeeze in one which I really want to ask you. Let me begin with an anonymous question. From a policy perspective, what is your opinion on banning or restricting the advertisements of packaged goods?
I think that the kind of steps that have been taken to restrict the sale of junk foods around, say, the perimeter of schools is a step in the right direction. And I think that needs to be implemented more carefully and more strictly. And it should be extended in the ways that some states are beginning to do. For instance, Kerala has begun to tax junk foods, aerated beverages. And that's the way it should be. People should be discouraged from eating these things. But I think that this form of the stick actually also needs to be balanced by social education, by teaching young people about the dangers of eating these kinds of things, except only occasionally. But, and this is the important point, which is very hard to fix, what we need to do is make nutritious food available to poorer people across the country. And that means shaping our entire agricultural policy, making sure that our public distribution carries nutritious cereals and not just wheat and polished rice, making sure that poor people can afford to grow nutritious food themselves by giving all kinds of agricultural incentives. So I agree with the question that there should be social policies that seek to restrict access to nutritious foods, but we also need to wean young people away so that they're not seduced anymore by these foods. And we need to really encourage people to move towards diets that are more nutritious by enabling them to grow those things, by improving their access to nutritious food.
Thank you. Alpana asks, the pricing of Maggi should have created a more equal society, but its advertisements did not. If the advertisements were to show children from financially strained backgrounds, do you think the demand for Maggi in privileged society would be the same? Did you get the question? Shall I repeat?
No, I got it. Yeah. So, I think, Alpana, things like Maggi are all about, like so many goods, they're all about selling a dream. And advertisers know this. They know that there's a lot of people who are aspiring to do better in life, to live with a sense of confidence and pride, and to, just be as good as everybody else. So people's sense of pride is more and more associated with what they wear, with what they eat, how they live. And even if they can't participate in all that they, for instance, see on television, the palatial homes in which soap operas are enacted, the women wearing all that jewelry and these glittering costumes, etc. They can't have any of that. But between the dream or fantasy world of cinema and TV are the advertisements. And what the advertisements promise you is glossy hair and fairer skin and fun things like noodles that beautiful children with their lovely parents eat. And you know what? You can go out in the market, and even if you're not rich, you can still buy them because it costs 5 rupees, it costs 10 rupees. So the marketers and producers of these commodities know that there's a huge demand, a genuine and I think rightful demand from people to improve their lives. And they're selling them this dream that your life will become better if your skin is fairer, if your hair is glossier, and if you eat the same noodles that Madhuri Dixit enjoys with her kids.
Got it. There's so many questions. I'm just going to try and quickly run through a few of them. Kaveri asks, is there a new oppressive hierarchy and new caste system where the urban elite eat healthy, natural, organic foods, while the less fortunate rural and Dalits eat unhealthy junk foods that are aspirational?
Kaveri, absolutely. And this is a trend that's been seen in other countries as well. And it's an irony that if you look at, who is selling jwar and bajra and ragi these days, it's Fab India. Or it's these, enriched multigrain cereals that are sold as flour by companies like Pillsbury. So there's an elite section which is, I think, somewhat obsessed, self-obsessed with eating right and being careful about their bodies. And they will consume all of these nutritious foods that they have, in a way, rediscovered. Even as the people who are right at the bottom, um, are aspiring to eat something else. And perhaps in the future, the demand that these elites create for these goods might also eventually sort of trickle down, so that, poorer people will also realize, hey, this is good stuff. But you have to remember that the reason poor people like convenience foods, is because it's less work and it consumes less fuel, and at the end of the day, it's easier to do when you're hungry. So often processing, cereals that are more nutritious takes more time. And elites can do it because they have a domestic worker at home who's going to do all the preparatory work and so on. So one has to also look at, who gets to actually do the work. What does it take to produce these things? And I think the dynamics of that are really shifting. Perhaps they'll shift in a good way towards greater demand, which would be welcome. But it's a little too early to say. But your question is spot on, that there is this funny inversion, whereas the elites who are eating the stuff that poorer people used to eat a generation ago.
Yeah, in fact, in the Silicon Valley, you can't miss a kale cafe and the other organic foods. They're prevalent everywhere. Melvin asks, with more women entering the formal economy, isn't hydrated maida the easiest and most comforting way to ensure that your child feels full for longer? Is Maggie helping women manage both roles of being a breadwinner as well as a quote unquote gendered caretaker?
That's a good point, Melvin. And I'm not passing judgment on people who eat Maggie. I'm just trying to understand the phenomenon from their point of view. And yep, if you're a woman who has to come back from work and is still expected to do the bulk of domestic chores, it's quite likely that, you will open a packet of Maggie and your child will have a hot, ready meal to eat. But that's the trouble with our society, that's the choice that's been shoved into our lives. Why is it that there isn't a more equal division of labor within the house? Why is it the woman who has to come and do it? Why is it that the only instant food that comes to mind is something made out of maida and, with sugar and fat at MSG? Why is it that we can't think of, I don't know, bananas or dalia? Or why does dalia seem dull and boring and Maggie seem fun? So these are all things to think about, how our cultural values have shifted. And that's a much larger question. It's bigger than what I can tackle in my research on industrial foods. But yeah, it really opens up a whole, can of worms.
Yeah, yeah. At some point, you should address what you think of Maggi, which is made of atta and other things, but it's not a question. I just thought I would quickly comment on
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Oh, may I say something about that, Utkarsh? Because to me, that whole wheat Maggie, atta Maggie, which says enough fiber as with, two rotis or something, is, of course, is much more expensive. So it's not what poor people are eating. So it's their way of recognizing that society is segmented, and one way in which better off people can mark themselves off from the rest, from those below them, while still enjoying the convenience of Maggie, is by eating atta Maggie, which is a sop to their conscience, because they can say, oh, it's more nutritious than the other kind. So this is what the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu calls creating distinction within society through the style in which you consume.
And I'm going to make a note of that name and go and study him out. Tamanna asks, what do you think about the popularity of Maggi in the South Asian diaspora, especially young Indians who have a utopian view of the subcontinent?
Tamanna, the number of people I've talked to who say that half their suitcase when they go back to wherever they're studying in the in the USA, or in Europe, that half their suitcase is stuffed of packets of Maggi noodles is very, very large. So I think Maggi has become the taste of growing up for a whole generation of young Indians, the way in which for another previous generation like mine, it could have been tahir sadam, it could have been dal bhat, it could have been sabzi roti. So what is comfort food has shifted, and a lot of people have told me it's something to do, they say, with the mouth feel of Maggi, the way those curly noodles feel on your tongue, on that very distinctive taste of the packet, the masala taste maker, which tastes like nothing else. It's a bit like the taste of Coke. It's a sort of proprietary thing which has been patented. It has no equivalent. So it's interesting to me that for a lot of people, especially Indians who are abroad, uh, Maggie is the food is the memory of the motherland. And it's also interesting that actually when people grow up a bit more, they stop eating Maggie. So there's something about Maggie and youth and about being young, which I think marks a particular moment, a stage in people's lives. And you're right that in the diaspora, it is something to which a lot of fond associations are attached.
Yeah, again, can't help but reflect about Pavlov's dog and the way Coke invokes the memory. In fact, Charlie Munger writes a lot about it. It's a very particular kind of memory that's revived.
Oh.
Aditya asks, now that Maggie is ubiquitous, discouraging people or depriving them of Maggie might seem like a loss. How does one make nutritious food attractive and aspirational?
Now, that's a very large question. Um, but it's all about change, and our tastes have changed so much over our lives, over our lifetimes. Think of all the things that we eat now. And, you know, I grew up without pizza, but then somewhere pizza became a part of my life. And, in the lockdown, I discovered that I could actually live without pizza. It's not one of those things that I'm missing. I'm just giving that as an example of what we think we need, what our, assumptions are, and how those assumptions can fall away either because of a crisis like the present one, or actually gradually because food habits change all the time. Maggie just wasn't around till the 1980s, and we were living quite happily. So I think that uh, it's important to move towards greater awareness. But I think it's also important to put pressure on all those institutions that profit from, um, pushing bad food at us. So it's not just about individual households saying, you know, parents saying, I'm not going to allow my child to eat Maggie, putting a dish of something more nutritious in front of her. But it's about a much wider social change where we can get businesses to change their practices. It just completely stumps me that there's these, all of this packaging is part of our landfills. We're destroying the environment because of this packaging. And yet we don't have a solid concerted campaign to get multinationals to change the material they use for what they produce. Now, to me, that's appalling. So there's a lot that we can do on this front.
Got it. Have you watched this movie Parasite? Because there's a question related to that. Have you?
I'm sorry, no, I haven't, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. So I will,
Essentially,
now
trying
that
to ask.
teaching is over, I'll get around to it.
Sure. Essentially, if you can maybe comment if there is any food in the Indian cuisine that shows the division between classes.
Oh, I don't quite know what that question means,
I think
but
perhaps, yeah, perhaps we need to watch the movie. Even I haven't watched it, so I'm still in the blanks here. Sudhamshu asks, can you give examples of how Maggie may be providing a seemingly classless, casteless, neutral experience in interaction between different castes? I feel that you addressed it, but if you want to add anything.
yeah. Hey, hi Sudhamshu. I think I know who this Sudhamshu is, and it's great to hear from him. Um, Sudhamshu, I want to point out that caste, the experience of caste permeates the lives of just so many people for all the time. It's only elites who can shrug their shoulders and say, oh, I don't even know what my caste is, or say, well, we don't practice caste in our family. But at the end of the day, it's a privilege to be able to make caste invisible in one's life. But as I did research in the city and on Delhi and inequality and Delhi's environment, I found that for a lot of people, to be able to dress the same way as others, to be able to travel on the metro with their earbuds plugged in, their mobile phone in their hands, wearing the same kind of fashions as everybody else, these were times and places where people felt, I'm just like everybody else. My Dalitness is not marked on my body. So it's not just about food. Food is one important element, but there's all kinds of ways in which the experience of caste is being reduced in certain spheres, is being represented in different ways in different spheres. I don't have the time to go into it in detail, but I think practices of eating the same kinds of foods, dressing the same way. In the Madhya Pradesh village where I did my research a generation ago, everybody wore, the older men all wore loincloths. Now they don't. Now they all wear, like shirts and trousers. They want to just fit in. They've changed their names. Names like Manglia have become Mangal Singh because Mangal Singh sounds more upper caste. So there are all of these strategies where people are trying to fit in, just as there are other Dalits who are trying to say, I'm proud of my identity and I'm going to assert it in the public sphere. So there's a lot going on there, which we could talk about on another occasion. But thanks for asking that question.
Dr. Baviskar, Pooja wants to know a little more about your methodology going into this research inquiry. And what was the research question that led to the inception of this project?
Pooja, all my work has been ethnographic, and it's a way by which I explore things in context. And often the research question isn't something that's formulated in advance. I have a sort of sense of what I want to look at, it's generally very broad. But the research question evolves through my time in the field, being there, watching things, participating in things, talking to people, which I do over an extended period of time, often several years, and through repeated encounters through which I build a relationship with the people that I'm talking to, often living with, visiting frequently. So it is this, through this kind of long term, somewhat intimate encounter, that I interpret what people's lives are like and write about them. So it's not the kind of more, positivist social science research where you go with a hypothesis, you have survey instruments, and you go and collect your data. This is much more a process of imbibing things, of listening and watching over a long period of time, paying attention, thinking about things, and then being able to interpret them, going back to people with my conclusions and saying, what do you think of this? Am I right here? So that's the kind of iterative process of going back and forth that we anthropologists and sociologists use in our research.
We just have time for two more questions. I'm going to club a few. So one set of people just want to understand about the policy implications. So Aliza, for example, asks, is the lack of government policy with regards to supplying food to the poor in any way responsible for the popularity of industrialized food?
Alicia, I don't know. I don't know whether that's the case. It's quite likely that even if the right to food was properly implemented and people got the nutritious food, in all its diversity, that is their entitlement, it's possible that they would eat less junk food. But I don't think there is such a direct correlation. I think that there is a whole world of corporate capitalism that's pushing this food. And where's the pushback? So we have to then, think about ways in which, I think the question you asked is a very important one, and that is that we should, as a society, have an institutional mechanism where people can grow food or buy food that meets all their bodily requirements and more. And then we have a separate issue, which is that of what to do with all this junk food. And there, I think we need a separate set of campaigns. And perhaps these can be interlinked, by the government encouraging people to grow nutritious grains, helping people just get a better diet in the midday meals and anganwadis, and all the other ways in which the government supports poor people's nutrition.
There's just a small follow-up on one answer you gave. This is on masala oats. It comes from Sanchit. So he wants to understand whether masala oats will be the new Maggi for millennials.
I don't know. I mean, I don't sit in some sort of marketing group and decide what millennials are going to eat next. Oats come from Australia, they're not Indian. And for years, it's baffled me why oats have been pushed as heart healthy and all that when we've got, perfectly good cereals and other, seeds of our own. So I don't know whether masala oatmeal will make it or not. I'm the wrong person to ask this. But, when I say oatmeal, I just kind of roll my eyes because there's other yummy foods that we grow in our hills, in our, dry lands. And I think those are the ones we should be encouraging.
Just the last question, and Kanshika wants to know, while there are many brands of instant noodles, some are priced even lower than Maggi. Why is there a special aura around Maggi which makes it survive and sustain government allegations and other things?
I mean, Maggi has a huge business empire behind it. And I think that makes a difference because it has financial clout. It has the marketing muscle to be able to make sure that its product is always in the public eye. You know, to be able to hire Madhuri Dixit and Amitabh Bachchan, that's a heck of a lot of money. To be able to have a marketing network that has its tentacles in, like remote villages across the country, that's a lot of Maggies that you can shift. So that would be my offhand response, that people aren't necessarily buying the cheapest noodles, but they're buying the ones that are the most desirable. And there's a way in which desire can be, conjured up if you have a lot of money to do it.
Okay, someone's been incessantly pinging me, so I'm going to squeeze in one more. What has been your most memorable Maggie moment? Do you think it was liberating in any way?
Oh my gosh, my most memorable Maggie moment. Um, well, I have to confess, I eat Maggie when in winter, when I feel like something, soupy, brothy, and hot. And yep, I also use Maggie, but I make it with lots of veggies that I put in and, cut up small. And I add my own seasoning. And so I have to say that it doesn't happen very often, and I always feel kind of guilty about it. But that is my memory of Maggie. A cold December, gloomy day in Delhi where I don't want to get out of the razai, but I get out and make myself some Maggie.
I had so much fun, asking you a question on behalf of almost 1,200 people who sent the 200 questions. So my apologies for not being able to accommodate every single question. But I hope it was as fascinating for you as it was for me. Let me take this opportunity on behalf of Ashoka University to thank all the 1,200 participants for joining us um, in the Beyond the Classroom series. Thank you so much for your comments, questions. We would absolutely love to get your feedback on this seminar. And in fact, right after this ends, there will be a 30-second survey that will pop up on your screen. Please take this survey and tell us what you think. Keep a lookout in your inbox. We'll be sending you a follow-up email with additional readings and the final recorded seminar. Finally, I'd like to remind you that we have a new faculty and topic every Wednesday and Friday evening at 8:30 p.m. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for the topic, faculty member, and sign-up details. Have a good night and see you on Wednesday in the Beyond the Classroom series. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Utkarsh.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
Dr.
fielding
Bhavesh.
all those questions.
See you very soon. Bye.
Bye bye. Thanks, dear audience. And thanks for all your questions too.
Thank you. Bye.